The wine glass shattered against the wall behind me, sending crimson droplets across the pristine white tablecloth like bloodstains on snow. The Christmas tree lights blinked silently in the corner, casting shadows that danced across my mother's contorted face as she spat the words that would forever divide my life into before and after. "You're dead to us, Ellie. As dead as the family you chose over your own blood." My father's silence beside her was somehow worse than her rage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The turkey I'd spent hours roasting sat untouched at the center of the table, surrounded by sides that had gone cold. My sister Rebecca clutched her husband's arm, eyes wide with shock. My brother Michael stared at his plate, refusing to look at me. The only sound was the gentle carol playing from the speakers, Silent Night, in cruel, perfect irony. My name is Eleanor Matthews. I'm 36 years old, and I spent my entire life trying to be the daughter my parents wanted, until I realized they never wanted me to be anything but a reflection of themselves. This is the story of how I found the courage to choose my own path, even when it meant making the hardest decision of my life. I didn't ask my parents to explain what they meant. I didn't need to. The carefully rehearsed disgust in my mother's eyes told me she'd been waiting for this moment. Christmas dinner, our entire family gathered around, the perfect audience for her performance. The perfect time to punish me for choosing to spend Thanksgiving with my fiancé's family instead of theirs. I rose slowly from my chair, legs trembling beneath me. The cranberry sauce I'd made from my grandmother's recipe, the one my mother had always criticized as too tart, spilled across the table as someone's elbow knocked over the serving dish. Red staining white again. A metaphor too on the nose for the moment. "Eleanor, sit down. You're making a scene." My father finally spoke, his voice carrying that familiar note of dismissal that had been the soundtrack to my childhood disappointments. Always the peacekeeper, never my defender. "No," I said, the word so quiet I wasn't sure I'd spoken it aloud until I saw my mother's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "I think I'll go." I walked to the coat rack, movements mechanical, and slid my arms into my winter jacket. No one moved to stop me. Outside, the December air hit my lungs like glass, sharp and clarifying. Snow fell in thick flakes, catching in my hair and melting against my heated cheeks. I walked to my car without looking back at the house I'd grown up in, the house where my mother had taught me to bake cookies while simultaneously critiquing my technique, where my father had helped with math homework while reminding me that B's weren't acceptable in the Matthews family. That night I sat in my apartment, still wearing my coat. The small Christmas tree I decorated with ornaments collected from travels and friendships stood in the corner, its lights twinkling with the warmth my parents' grand spruce had never managed to convey. The gifts I'd carefully wrapped for my family sat in a bag by the door, books chosen specifically for each person, photo frames, handmade scarves. I stared at the empty chair across from me and wondered how long my parents had been rehearsing those words. How many holiday gatherings had they silently cataloged my failures, storing them up for the perfect moment of public execution? I thought of all the Christmases before this one, the handmade cards I'd created as a child, the years I'd helped decorate their house with lights, the decades spent trying to earn love that always came with conditions. I placed the unopened bottle of wine I'd brought to dinner in the fridge but left the gifts by the door. I went to bed with the taste of unspoken words in my mouth, and my mother's declaration ringing in my ears. "You're dead to us." The next morning, I opened my journal to a blank page. My hand hovered over the paper, waiting for permission I would never receive from the people who should have given it freely. In that stillness, memories surged forward, like floodwaters breaking through a dam. I was 24 when I abandoned my dream of becoming a photojournalist. My parents had called, voices dripping with disappointment, when they discovered I'd applied for a position with National Geographic instead of the corporate job they'd arranged at my father's company. "We didn't pay for your education so you could waste it chasing fantasies," my mother had said. "Your father pulled strings for this position. Do you know how embarrassing it would be if you turned it down?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I remembered my photography professor's face, when I told him I wouldn't be pursuing the fellowship he'd recommended me for. "You have real talent, Eleanor," he'd said gently. "Don't let it go to waste." I nodded but never contacted the fellowship committee. I started at my father's company the following week. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I found my footing, saved some money, built up my portfolio on weekends. But years passed in increments marked by promotions, office parties, and monthly dinners at my parents' house where they proudly introduced me to their friends as our daughter, the marketing director. I took the position my father had arranged, flexible but demanding, tethered to their expectations. I dated quietly, but never seriously, until James. When someone asked about my photography, I changed the subject. When my mother decided my apartment needed refreshing, I agreed without protest. She replaced my gallery wall of travel photos with abstract paintings that, quote, made more of a statement. "It's more sophisticated," she'd said. I convinced myself it didn't matter. It was still my home, even if it didn't look like mine. I let her convince me to sell the vintage camera collection I'd built during college. I nodded when she called it cluttered. I said yes to every little no. That was our rhythm, they decided. I adjusted. But now, in the quiet of this morning after Christmas, it felt different. The pattern wasn't respect or family duty. It was erasure. A slow unraveling strand by strand, until I couldn't tell where I ended and their expectations began. I lowered my pen and finally wrote, "I gave up so much trying not to disappoint them, but I never asked if I was allowed to want more than surviving their approval." The ink bled into the page. I tore it out, folded it carefully, and placed it in my wallet behind my driver's license. Then I pulled out my laptop and began looking for photography workshops and exhibitions, accepting submissions. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced even when my body remained still. I kept replaying all the moments I should have said something, drawn a line, made a choice that centered me instead of them. But I hadn't. I'd waited for the situation to become unbearable before I dared to name it. In the morning, I made coffee but didn't drink it. I sat at my kitchen table, opened a new document, and typed a sentence that had been waiting years to exist. "I have been edited out of my own life." The words landed harder on screen than they did in my chest. I read them twice, then made them bold. Then I began. I made a list of everything my parents had access to, joint investment accounts my father had insisted on managing until you really understand the market, my emergency credit card that was actually on their account, my health insurance through the family business. I circled the things that needed to change first. I'd been saving for years, living well below my means because frugality was a virtue my parents had instilled deeply. Next, I gathered all the paperwork I could find. Insurance forms, investment statements, the employment contract I'd signed with my father's company that included clauses about family loyalty that I'd never questioned. I called an independent financial advisor and scheduled an appointment to review my options for separating my finances completely from my parents' influence. I researched new jobs at companies with no connection to my father's business network. I searched for apartment listings in neighborhoods my parents considered unsafe or undesirable, which usually meant diverse, vibrant areas with character. I told no one what I was doing. Not Rebecca, not Michael, certainly not James, who still couldn't understand why I'd chosen his family's Thanksgiving over my own. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even anger. It was air. After holding my breath for over a decade, I needed to breathe. That afternoon, I stood in my living room and looked around the apartment, not with sentiment, but with precision. What was mine? What had been chosen by me, and what had been selected to shape me into someone else's vision? My eyes landed on a small wooden box on the bookshelf, the only thing I had that had belonged to my grandmother, who had died when I was 15. I opened it and pulled out the old camera film rolls I'd hidden there, undeveloped memories from college trips my parents had disapproved of. The next day, I drove to meet the financial advisor. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from my siblings asking what had happened, why I'd left, whether I was coming to New Year's Eve at our parents' as planned. I silenced it without responding. The advisor was professional and thorough, showing me exactly how entangled my finances were with my parents' holdings and offering clear steps to disentangle them. This might take some time, she warned, and they'll notice the changes. Are you prepared for that conversation? I nodded, more certain than I'd felt in years. Yes, it's time. My parents noticed my absence. Not right away, but by the third day after Christmas, when I hadn't responded to any messages and hadn't shown up for the traditional post-holiday brunch. My mother's text shifted from cutting, "Your behavior was inexcusable, but we're willing to move past it if you apologize appropriately," to concerned, "Eleanor, this silent treatment is childish. We're worried." I stopped responding entirely. I applied for 3 jobs at companies I actually admired. I took my film rolls to a specialty shop that could still develop them. I spent an evening deleting the apps my mother had insisted I install so she could track my location in case of emergency. I cooked meals I enjoyed instead of following the meal plan my father's nutritionist had created for the family. One morning, my mother appeared at my apartment door with a small gift bag and a practiced expression of contrition. "I thought we could talk," she said, her voice softer than it had been at Christmas. "Your father and I may have overreacted." "May have?" I repeated, not moving from the doorway to let her in. She sighed, the familiar sound of disappointment that had shaped so many of my choices. "Don't be difficult, Eleanor. We said things in the heat of the moment. Family arguments happen. You know how important family loyalty is to us?" I nodded, but didn't invite her in. "I do know. That's why I'm confused about why you'd tell your daughter she's dead to you over a Thanksgiving dinner choice. You chose his family over yours," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me," I repeated slowly, tasting the words. "Like arranging my entire life? Choosing my career? Decorating my home? Managing my money? Tell me, Mom, what exactly is left of me that you haven't shaped to your specifications?" Her face changed, the practiced warmth vanishing. "I don't like your tone. Or this new attitude. I came here to make peace." "No," I said quietly. "You came here to reassert control. There's a difference." I closed the door before she could respond. That evening, I found a letter in my mailbox without a return address. The envelope was cream-colored, the paper heavy and expensive. I recognized the handwriting before I opened it. Precise, perfectly aligned, written with my father's Mont Blanc pen. My father rarely wrote anything by hand. "Eleanor," it began, without a greeting. "Your mother is devastated by your behavior. While I understand your need for independence, there are proper ways to assert yourself that don't involve family rejection. The Matthews name carries responsibilities as well as privileges. I've scheduled a meeting with HR to discuss your future at the company. This rebellion has gone far enough. Your grandfather built this business for our family's future, your future. Don't throw that away over a petty holiday disagreement." I read it twice, then once more, just to feel the weight of the threat beneath the words. My eyes didn't sting this time, not from pain, not from anger, but from the clarity of finally seeing the cage I'd been living in, decorated to look like privilege. I folded the letter along its creases and placed it in my grandmother's box next to the newly developed photographs. Images of mountains I'd climbed, streets I'd wandered in foreign cities, faces of people I'd connected with during my brief time of freedom before I'd surrendered to the life my parents had designed. That evening I made dinner just for myself and played music my mother had always called common. When the dishes were done, I opened my laptop and finalized my resignation letter. I had already spoken with a lawyer about the contractual implications of leaving the family business. The next step would be accepting one of the 2 job offers I'd received and finding a new apartment further from my parents' sphere of influence. I checked the locks before I went to bed, then placed my journal on the nightstand where I could see it. The next morning, I dressed in clothes I'd chosen myself, not the designer labels my mother preferred, and drove to my father's office. His assistant's eyes widened when she saw me. "Eleanor, we weren't expecting you today. Your father is in a meeting." "I know his schedule," I said calmly. "I'll wait." I sat in the reception area, resignation letter in hand, and watched the minutes tick by on the expensive clock my grandfather had imported from Switzerland when he founded the company. 30 minutes later, my father's office door opened. He stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. "Eleanor, this is unexpected." He gestured for me to come in, already turning back to his desk, assuming I would follow as I always had. "I'll be brief," I said, remaining seated. "I won't be attending the HR meeting you scheduled. In fact, I won't be coming back to the office at all." I held out the envelope. My resignation, effective immediately. He didn't take it. "Don't be dramatic. Whatever point you're trying to make, there are better ways to handle family disagreements." "This isn't about Christmas dinner," I said, placing the envelope on the reception desk. "This is about reclaiming my life. All of it." My father's face tightened, the familiar mask of controlled disappointment settling over his features. "You're throwing away everything we've built for you." His voice was even measured, the tone he used in board meetings when someone had made a critical error. "This isn't just about a job, Eleanor. This is about your place in this family." I stood taller, my spine straightening with each word. "That's exactly the problem. My place has always been wherever you decided to put me." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to be there when this rebellious phase ends." The threat hung in the air between us, heavy with decades of conditional love. I looked back at him, at the man who had taught me to ride a bike while lecturing me about proper form, who had paid for my education while dictating my major, who had given me everything except the freedom to choose. "I'm not expecting anything from you anymore, that's the whole point." Outside, the winter air filled my lungs, crisp and clean. For the first time in years, breathing didn't feel like an act of careful restraint. I walked to my car without looking back at the gleaming office building, with the family name displayed prominently above the entrance, Matthews Consulting Group, where 3 generations of my family had built their legacy. A legacy I was now leaving behind. That evening, a storm came, not from the sky, but through my phone. It started with texts from Rebecca. "Dad is furious. What were you thinking? Mom hasn't stopped crying." Then came the calls from extended family and family friends, the polite but probing ones. "Just checking in. Heard there's been some tension. Your parents are worried about you." My parents had clearly been making calls, activating their network of social connections that had always felt more like surveillance than support. My cousin Emily, who usually only contacted me for professional favors, didn't bother sugarcoating it. "I can't believe you'd do this to them after everything they've sacrificed for you. The family name means something in this city, Eleanor." I turned my phone to silent and let it buzz itself into darkness. My laptop pinged with emails. Some from colleagues expressing confusion about my sudden departure, others from my father's business associates with thinly veiled offers to mediate the family dispute. I closed it without responding to any of them. I spent the evening packing up my apartment, sorting through possessions with new eyes. The expensive furniture my mother had selected for my starter apartment 7 years ago. The artwork chosen to reflect the right image. The bookshelf filled with business and self-improvement titles my father had given me each birthday, inscribed with notes about my potential, if only I applied myself properly. I separated everything into 3 categories: what I truly wanted to keep, what could be sold, and what would be returned to my parents. The third pile grew largest, a physical manifestation of how little of my life had actually been mine. When I finished, my apartment looked hollowed out, but strangely more like home than it had in years. The next morning, I drove to the small photography studio, where I'd accepted a position as an assistant and project manager. The owner, Diane, was a renowned photographer in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair and hands marked with darkroom chemicals despite the digital age. She'd remembered me from a workshop I'd attended during college, before I'd surrendered my camera for a corporate badge. "You're overqualified for this position," she'd said during the interview, studying me over reading glasses, "and underexperienced in the actual work. Interesting combination." "I need to start over," I'd replied honestly. "I need to remember what I loved before I let other people decide what I should value." She'd hired me on the spot. The studio smelled of paper and possibility. Exposed brick walls displayed Diane's work, stark landscapes and intimate portraits that revealed something essential about their subjects. The space was smaller than my former office, the salary significantly less, but my shoulders relaxed as soon as I stepped through the door. "First day jitters?" Diane asked, handing me a mug of coffee without asking if I wanted one. "More like first day liberation," I answered, accepting the mug gratefully. She nodded approvingly. "Good. Fear is useless. Excitement at least has somewhere to go." She gestured to a desk in the corner. "That's yours. First project's on the computer. We're documenting the demolition and reconstruction of the old theater downtown. Historical preservation meets progress. City Council wants a visual record. Thought you might appreciate the metaphor." I smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. Breaking down to rebuild. Yes, I'm familiar with the concept. Over the next few weeks, I settled into new rhythms. I found a small apartment in an area my parents had always avoided. A vibrant neighborhood with family-owned restaurants and street art. The rent was reasonable. The space modest but filled with light perfect for photography. I sold most of the furniture from my old place and used the money to buy a new camera and equipment. I reconnected with James, explaining everything that had happened. "I should have told you why Thanksgiving with your family meant so much to me," I said over coffee. I needed to see what a holiday could be like without walking on eggshells. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I wish you'd told me sooner. No one should have to earn a place at their family's table." My parents escalated their campaign to bring me back into the fold. First came the financial pressure. My father's attorney sent formal notice that my resignation violated terms of my employment contract, threatening legal action for breach of confidentiality and non-compete clauses. My lawyer responded calmly, pointing out that general marketing knowledge wasn't proprietary and that the contract's family loyalty clauses were likely unenforceable. Then came the social pressure. Friends I'd had since childhood suddenly couldn't make plans. Country club memberships mysteriously couldn't be renewed. My mother's influence in local charity circles meant invitations to events I'd previously been expected to attend suddenly stopped arriving. "They're trying to isolate you," James observed one evening as I recounted the latest snub. "No," I corrected him. "They're showing me exactly who was friends with me and who was friends with my parents' daughter." The distinction had become increasingly important. The financial warfare intensified. I discovered my parents had been making regular deposits into my primary savings account for years. Gifts I hadn't noticed because I rarely checked the account they'd set up for me. Now they demanded repayment, claiming these were loans for, quote, professional development. My new salary couldn't cover such demands, and they knew it. I met with my financial advisor again, who helped me document what could legally be considered gifts versus loans. "This is unusual," she admitted. "Most parents don't weaponize their financial support quite so systematically." "My parents aren't most parents," I replied, signing the paperwork to liquidate the investment account my father had managed, accepting the penalties and taxes because freedom from their control was worth more than money. 3 months after Christmas dinner, I received a text from my brother Michael, the first contact from immediate family that wasn't accusatory. "Mom and Dad were in an accident. Memorial Hospital. Serious. Come now." My hands shook as I grabbed my keys. Whatever had happened between us, they were still my parents. The drive to the hospital was a blur of worst-case scenarios and complicated grief. In the emergency waiting room, I found Michael pacing, his face drawn with worry. "What happened?" I asked, heart pounding. "Car accident. They were coming back from the symphony. Drunk driver hit them at an intersection. He ran a hand through his hair. Dad's in surgery. Mom's unconscious. Head trauma. They're saying we should prepare for difficult decisions." Rebecca arrived minutes later, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at me with surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to come. "You're here." "Of course I'm here," I said quietly. "They're our parents." The next hours passed in sterile waiting rooms and hushed consultations with doctors. My father survived surgery but remained in critical condition. Multiple internal injuries, severe blood loss. My mother was worse. The impact had caused traumatic brain injury, and she showed minimal brain activity. The doctors were direct but compassionate. Recovery was unlikely for either of them. We need to discuss care options and potential end-of-life decisions, the neurologist explained gently. Your parents' advanced directives are somewhat outdated, but they did appoint healthcare proxies. She looked at her clipboard. For your father, it's your mother. For your mother, it's your father. Given the circumstances, these decisions now fall to next of kin. Rebecca immediately looked at me, not because I was oldest, but because taking charge in crisis had always been my role in the family. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, familiar and heavy. I'll need to see their medical records and directives, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I want to speak with each specialist involved in their care. The next days blurred together. I took a leave of absence from the studio, sleeping in hospital waiting rooms and having whispered conferences with doctors in hallways. I reviewed medical charts, consulted with specialists, and researched treatment options until my eyes burned. James brought me clean clothes and forced me to eat occasionally, sitting silently beside me when there was nothing to say. A week passed with little improvement. My father remained unconscious, his body fighting infections from surgery. My mother showed no signs of neurological recovery. The medical team became increasingly gentle in their assessments, which I recognized as their way of preparing us for the inevitable. One evening, as I sat beside my mother's bed, a nurse placed a hand on my shoulder. "There's someone here to see you. Says she's a friend of your parents." In the hallway stood Mrs. Winters, my parents' neighbor for over 20 years. She'd always been kind to me, sneaking me cookies when my mother declared sugar off limits, admiring my photographs when my parents dismissed them as a hobby. "Eleanor," she said, embracing me with surprising strength for her age. "I'm so sorry about your parents. Thank you for coming," I said, meaning it. She held my gaze for a long moment. "I need to tell you something. After you left at Christmas, I visited your parents for our usual New Year's toast. Your father was not himself. Your mother was inconsolable. They spoke about you as if—" she hesitated. "As if they'd lost you permanently. Your father said they'd written you out of their will that day. The information should have hurt, but instead, it brought clarity. Even facing my independence, they'd chosen punishment over understanding. Why are you telling me this?" "Because," she said gently, "whatever you decide about their care, I want you to know it's not your fault. They made choices too, Eleanor. Choices about how to love, how to parent. Those choices had consequences, just as yours do." That night, I sat in the hospital chapel, not praying exactly, but searching for the right path through impossible terrain. The weight of my parents' lives rested in my hands, the same hands they'd tried to control, to shape, to direct. Now those hands would make the final decisions about their care. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents, who had never trusted me to choose my own career or apartment or even furniture, were now completely dependent on my judgment. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, but it brought no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what could have been. I thought about what my parents would want. Not just what their outdated medical directives stated, but what they truly would choose if they could see themselves now, maintained by machines, without consciousness or dignity. My father, who prized control above all else. My mother, who feared nothing more than dependence and vulnerability. The next morning, I gathered Rebecca and Michael in a quiet consultation room. "I've spoken with every specialist," I said. "They're not going to recover. Not in any way that would be meaningful to them." "So what do we do?" Rebecca asked, tears streaming down her face. "We make the hardest choice," I answered. "We let them go." Michael's face crumpled. "How can we decide that? How can you decide that after everything that's happened?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because I can separate my feelings about them as parents from what they would want as people. Dad would never want to live dependent on machines. Mom would never want to exist without awareness or control. They'd never let us go like this," Rebecca whispered. "That's the difference," I said quietly. "I'm not doing this to punish them. I'm doing this because it's what they would choose for themselves, even though they couldn't give that same respect to us. After hours of discussion, tears, and shared memories, both painful and precious, Rebecca and Michael agreed. We signed the papers to withdraw life support, requesting comfort measures only. The medical team was compassionate and thorough, explaining each step of the process. We sat with our parents in their final hours. I held my mother's hand, remembering how she'd taught me to write thank you notes with perfect penmanship, how she'd brushed my hair with exactly 100 strokes each night when I was small, how she'd both nurtured and contained me with the same careful hands. I forgive you, I whispered to her. I hope somewhere, somehow, you can forgive me too. My father went first, his heartbeat slowing gradually until it simply stopped. My mother followed hours later, as if even in this final journey she was following his lead. We wept together. Rebecca, Michael, and I, united in grief that was complicated by years of love that had come with conditions we couldn't always meet. After the memorial service, smaller and more intimate than my parents would have planned, I returned to the photography studio. Diane didn't ask questions when I came back, just handed me a camera and pointed to a calendar of upcoming projects. Art heals what medicine cannot, she said simply. When you're ready, there's an exhibit opportunity I think you should consider. What's the theme? I asked, grateful for the distraction. Rebirth, she replied. Documenting transformations, endings that become beginnings. I think you might have something to contribute. 3 months after my parents' funeral, I stood in the studio gallery surrounded by my photographs, images that chronicled my journey from Christmas night to this moment of quiet rebirth. The exhibition, titled Reclamation, had drawn an unexpected crowd for a Thursday evening opening. Diane moved through the space with practiced ease, engaging potential buyers and critics with equal charm. Your series is resonating, she said, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. 3 red dots already. And the arts writer from the Tribune can't stop talking about your use of light and shadow. She handed me a glass. How does it feel to see your work on these walls? I looked around at the photographs, stark winter landscapes gradually giving way to spring, abandoned buildings reclaimed by nature, portraits of people at pivotal moments of transition. The centerpiece was a triptych, the empty chair at my parents', dining table, the hospital room after they were gone, and finally my new apartment bathed in morning light, my grandmother's camera visible in the foreground. It feels like coming home, I answered honestly, to myself. James arrived late, apologetic and slightly breathless. Sorry, surgery ran long. Did I miss your speech? He kissed my cheek, his eyes already scanning the photographs with genuine interest. No speech, I assured him. Just people looking at pieces of my heart hanging on these walls and pretending it's art. It is art, he corrected gently. And it's brave. Across the room I spotted Rebecca hesitating near the entrance, Michael beside her. Their presence surprised me. We'd spoken only sporadically since the funeral, our shared grief complicated by years of family dynamics that hadn't died with our parents. I excused myself from James and walked over to them. You came, I said simply. Rebecca nodded, her expression a mixture of discomfort and determination. We said we would. She glanced around the gallery. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? I asked, genuinely curious. I don't know, something angrier maybe. These are... She paused, searching for the right word. Contemplative, hopeful even. Michael, who had always been the quietest of us, stepped forward to examine the triptych more closely. This is Mom and Dad's dining room, he observed, pointing to the first image. Christmas night? Yes, I confirmed. After I left, he studied it longer than necessary, as if trying to see beyond the empty chair to some hidden truth. You captured something here. The absence feels significant. That's what I was trying to show, I explained. Not just what was lost, but the space that loss creates for something new. Rebecca moved to stand beside him, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. We found their updated will, she said abruptly. From after Christmas, you were right, they did write you out. I nodded, the confirmation of Mrs. Winters, information less painful now that time had passed. I figured as much. But here's the thing. Michael continued, his voice low. There was a letter with it. For you. The lawyer gave it to us after everything was settled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, the paper expensive and heavy, my name written in my father's precise handwriting. I took it with steady hands, surprising myself with how calm I felt. Have you read it? No, Rebecca answered. But whatever it says, we wanted you to know that we don't agree with how they handled things. With you, with us, with everything. I slipped the letter into my purse without opening it. Thank you for bringing this, and for coming tonight. It means a lot. Rebecca hesitated, then asked, Do you think you could show us around? Explain some of your work? I want to understand. The request was tentative but sincere. Perhaps the first time Rebecca had ever asked to see the world through my eyes rather than expecting me to see through hers. I nodded and guided them through the exhibition, explaining my process, the stories behind certain images, the technical challenges I'd overcome. By the time we reached the final photograph, a sunrise over the city skyline taken from my new apartment's window, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility, the beginning of a conversation we'd never been allowed to have. Your show is beautiful, Ellie, Rebecca said as they prepared to leave, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. I think I'd like to come see your new place sometime, if that's okay. I'd like that, I replied, meaning it. After they left, James found me staring at the triptych, my thoughts swirling with the evening's unexpected reconciliation. You okay? He asked. They brought me a letter from my father, I explained, written after Christmas, before the accident. Are you going to read it? I considered the question. Yes, but not tonight. Tonight is about what I've created, not what they wanted to say. He nodded, understanding as always. Want to get out of here? Diane seems to have everything under control, and you've done your duty as the artist of the hour. We slipped away as the gallery continued to buzz with conversation and appreciation. Outside, the spring air was soft with possibility, the city lights reflecting in puddles from an earlier rain. We walked in comfortable silence for several blocks before James spoke again. I've been thinking about what you said last week, about building a life that's truly yours, not defined by what you're running from. I remember, I said, wondering where he was going with this. He stopped walking and turned to face me. I have a proposition. The international medical program I've been corresponding with, the one in Tanzania, they need someone to document their work. Photos, stories, building awareness for the communities they serve. My heart quickened. You're asking me to go with you? I'm asking if you'd consider it. 6 months minimum. It would mean putting your new life here on pause, but... He hesitated. I think it might be exactly the kind of work you've been looking for. I thought about what such an opportunity would have meant to me before, how impossible it would have seemed, how quickly I would have dismissed it as impractical, irresponsible, inconsiderate of family obligations. But now, standing on a rain-washed street with my exhibition behind me and an unexpected future ahead, the proposition felt like an invitation rather than an impossibility. When would we leave? I asked, already imagining the photographs I could create, the stories I could tell, the perspective I could gain thousands of miles from everything familiar. His smile was answer enough. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my father's letter before me, unopened. Sunlight streamed through windows that had no curtains because I hadn't decided what style I wanted yet. A small freedom that still gave me joy. My camera sat beside me, ready for the day's work at the studio. A notebook lay open with lists for the Tanzania preparation. Vaccinations, equipment, visa requirements. I picked up the envelope and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the letterhead from my father's company. His signature at the bottom as formal as if it were a business correspondence. The letter was dated December 28th, 3 days after Christmas, nearly a month before the accident. Eleanor, it began without greeting. By the time you read this, our attorney will have executed our revised estate plan, which removes you from inheritance considerations. This decision wasn't made in haste, but is the culmination of years of disappointment in your inability to honor family obligations and priorities. Your mother and I have provided every advantage, every opportunity for you to succeed within the parameters of the Matthews legacy. Your consistent resistance to guidance and your recent public rejection of family loyalty leave us no choice but to sever financial ties. The position at the company will remain available should you reconsider your priorities, but inheritance privileges have been permanently revoked. I trust this clarity will help you understand the consequences of your choices. Jonathan Matthews. I read it twice, then once more, waiting for the pain to come. Instead, I felt an unexpected lightness, almost amusement at how perfectly the letter captured everything I'd been trying to escape. The conditional love, the rigid expectations, the constant framing of independence as betrayal. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, then reached for my journal. On a fresh page, I wrote, "Dear Dad, I wish you could see the exhibition. Not because I need your approval, I don't anymore, but because I want you to understand that what you saw as rejection was actually reclamation. I wasn't leaving the family. I was trying to find a place within it where I could breathe. I made the hardest choice of my life when I let you and Mom go. Not because I wanted to exercise power over you, but because I believed you deserved dignity, even when you couldn't extend the same to me. You taught me to be strong, to be decisive, to stand firm in my convictions. It's ironic that when I finally applied those lessons, it was to free myself from your expectations. But perhaps that's how it was meant to be, the student eventually outgrowing the teacher. I'm going to Tanzania. I'm going to take photographs that matter and tell stories that need telling. I'm going to build a life that honors the best parts of what you gave me while releasing the rest. I forgive you for not seeing me. I hope someday you'd have been proud of who I became once I learned to see myself. Love, Eleanor." I didn't cry as I wrote. The words flowed with a clarity I'd been seeking all my life. Not angry, not bitter, just true. When I finished, I didn't tear out the page or mail it to some symbolic destination. I simply closed the journal, picked up my camera, and prepared for the day ahead. 2 weeks later, I stood in my nearly empty apartment. Most of my furniture had been sold or donated. My remaining possessions were either packed for Tanzania or stored with Diane, who had enthusiastically supported my decision to join the medical program. 6 months will fly by, she had assured me, and the portfolio you'll build will open doors you haven't even thought to knock on yet. Rebecca and Michael had helped me pack the previous weekend. An awkward but meaningful attempt at rebuilding something between us that wasn't defined by our parents' expectations. We'd made plans to video call monthly, a commitment that felt genuine rather than obligatory. "I think they'd hate this," Rebecca had said as we taped up boxes of camera equipment. "You going to Africa, throwing away a real career for photography." "Probably," I agreed. "But I don't," she added quietly. "I think it's brave." The admission had hung between us, significant in its simplicity. Not complete understanding, but a beginning. Now, as I did one final sweep of the apartment, my phone chimed with a text from James. "Car's packed. Ready when you are." I took a moment to stand in the center of the empty space that had been my first true home. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the bare floors, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stillness. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that Christmas dinner that had shattered my carefully constructed compliance, through the grief of losing my parents, to this moment of genuine possibility. I thought about the choices that had seemed impossible a year ago, leaving the family business, pursuing photography, setting boundaries, making medical decisions, forgiving without forgetting. Each step had required courage I hadn't known I possessed until I needed it. The letter from my father remained in my journal, which was packed in my carry-on. Not as a reminder of rejection, but as evidence of how far I'd come from the person who would have been devastated by those words. The exhibition catalog from Reclamation was there too, proof that pain could be transformed into something meaningful, even beautiful. I locked the apartment door behind me for the last time and walked down the stairs to where James waited. The afternoon sun was warm on my face as I stepped outside, my camera bag slung over my shoulder, ready to capture whatever came next. "All set?" James asked, holding the car door open. I looked back at the building briefly, then forward to the road ahead. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." As we drove toward the airport, I thought about all the people who find themselves at similar crossroads. Moments when they must choose between the safety of familiar unhappiness and the terrifying freedom of the unknown. I thought about how many stay trapped in lives designed by others because the alternative seems impossible. But it isn't impossible. It's just difficult, painful, and absolutely necessary. My name is Eleanor Matthews. I'm 37 years old, and I spent most of my life trying to be the daughter my parents wanted until I found the courage to become the person I needed to be. This isn't the end of my story, it's barely the beginning, but it's mine now. Every word, every choice, every frame I choose to capture. And that makes all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.